Hey everybody, Yankee here. You know, I'm not the most technologically savvy guy in the world. I do okay, but I don't often use the tools that are available to me, like the computer. So when I go to keep notes and stuff, it's usually stuff like this, like scribbles on paper. Not very organized, not very, I don't remember what I was meaning when I write some of this stuff down. I look at it and I'm like, what does that mean? So it's not a really good system. And because of that, I sometimes miss things. Like people ask questions or I come up with an idea, but I write it down and then later I don't get around to it because I lose it. And that's the case with this question. It's a question that came in a while ago, but I want to answer it. A viewer asked me if in the future, if society decides that the Second Amendment is something that shouldn't exist, like 70-80% of people are convinced that the Second Amendment is wrong and it should be infringed, our rights to own guns should be infringed, does that mean we as gun owners have to admit that we were wrong? And they used the example of, used to be most people thought that interracial marriage was wrong. But it was forced upon them by the courts that people can get married no matter what race they are. And then later, whatever sex they are. And people now have to admit, from back in the day, most people will say, well, those people were wrong. That was not something that should be. That those restrictions shouldn't be there. And they said, is that something that applies to like the idea of guns? If most people decide that guns are bad, does that mean we have to admit that guns are bad? Well, no, these are totally different concepts. First off, the idea that interracial marriage is bad, that isn't based on a truth. That's based on a bigoted idea. That's based on racism and hate. And we usually try to evolve beyond those things. So that was a fallacy to begin with, and eventually people just realized it was a fallacy. Some things are truths, and sometimes it takes people a long time to recognize a truth. And sometimes along the way, people will turn their backs on that truth. Usually weak-minded people are very easy to convince that what's good for them is actually bad for them. And that's what we see in this country quite often. The government and the billionaires that control them convince the masses that what's best for them is actually what's wrong with this country, and convince them to give away their own freedoms and their own independence and their own ability to prosper for the benefit of those people in power. And that's what it would be if they were turned against guns. Because guns themselves are just tools. And the idea that people would not die if guns were not around is provably false. In fact, there's no way to even show one person's life would be saved if we didn't have guns. People would still take advantage of other people. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that would show, when you look at how many people are killed with guns every year and how many people defend themselves with guns every year that would otherwise be a victim, guns save lives every year. Guns help people protect their property. Guns give the government a reason to pause and think before they do something when they know the populace is armed and can fight back. The guns are a positive truth. The fact that the independence that comes from our ability to be armed is a provable fact. And no matter how hard or how successful a government is in convincing people that that's not the truth, it's still a truth. One of the great philosophers, was it Tolstoy? Not Tolstoy. Someone, I forget who it was, I'm not a philosopher, said that basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, that a fallacy is still a fallacy. It doesn't matter if the majority partake in it. And like I said, I'm paraphrasing there. In other words, a lie is still a lie, even if most people believe it. And the fact that society would be better without guns is a lie, no matter how many people believe it. The idea that guns are the root of all evil is a lie, no matter how many people believe it. And that's mathematically provable. It's philosophically provable. And I'm not saying society doesn't become worse sometimes and believe lies. It's like after the McCarthy hearings. That's when we started adding in God we trust to everything. And everyone started saying, oh, we're a religious country. We're a Christian nation. That wasn't even an idea in the 1800s. No one thought that. People knew different. But that became the prominent idea for a while. And we're still fighting that today. That didn't mean it was right. It's provably wrong if you look at the Constitution and you look at the laws and you look at the writings of the founders. But a majority of people started believing it. But it was false. So majority belief doesn't have anything to do with whether something's right or something's wrong. And in the case of guns, the powers that be, the government, and the billionaires that own them, and they own them, lock, stock, and barrel. Politicians are just there to make you feel like you have a say in things. They are not wanting you to be armed. They don't want you to have freedom. They don't want you to be able to fight back. I mean, remember, they're 1%. They don't want the other 99 to have power. They have to consolidate all that power under them. And that's one of the things they do to do that, is convince you that guns are bad. So if they convince people of that, the majority of people that, which I believe they've already hit the tipping point to where the majority actually believe that, we are not doing well as a gun community at fighting back. We are not doing well as a gun community at growing our tent or spreading our message in a positive manner, because we've allowed the people that have a vested interest in maintaining the division and maintaining the fight to be the people in charge. But that's a different topic. Like I said, doesn't make it right just because the majority of people believe it. We can prove that guns are a positive thing in society. We can prove the idea of an armed populace is a good thing as far as maintaining a free society. That's all truth, whether people want to believe it or not. Now, if we ever evolved as a society to the point where we were superior beings who no longer preyed on each other, and we didn't have governments that oppressed people or did what's best for a small number of people at the expense of the majority, well then, yeah, maybe we wouldn't need guns anymore, but that'd be a different set of circumstances. The circumstances we live in now, the reality we live in now, shows that guns and the ability of the people to be armed and able to defend themselves is a positive thing in most every way. In fact, every way. I can't think of a negative to it. And people be like, oh, but the violent crime. Well, there's violence everywhere. Everywhere you have a mishmash of a bunch of different cultures and people and everything else, and they live in high concentrations, there's going to be violence. And whether they're killing each other with guns or, as Archie Bunker said, pushing each other out of windows, it ain't really going to matter. That's all going to still happen. The guns themselves are a tool, and they're a positive tool, no matter how many people are convinced otherwise. Just because a lot of people are convinced that reality isn't real doesn't mean it isn't still reality. So until our reality changes, guns are a good thing, no matter how many people recognize that or how many people think it's not true.